energy in the room. I wish we could just do that for another hour. I'd like to talk a second about growth curves. Great talk, by the way.
Nice.
There's a lot of kind of growth curves out there. There's, quarterly earnings, and there's the GDP and these kinds of things. But the growth curve that I'm preoccupied with, the one that I'm most interested in, is yours and mine and all of ours. It's the individual growth curve. And one way we could picture this is, take a look over here. What if we imagine people from 0 to 100, okay, on one side. And on the other axis, we said, what percentage of your day, maybe your waking hours, are you trying something new? Are you learning? Are you growing? Are you doing something different? When we're off the charts, when we're like 2 weeks old or 6 months old, all the waking hours, there might not be a lot of them, right? We are learning a ton, where everything is new. We enter the school system, it sags a little bit, but still, a decent amount of our hours, a decent number of the waking hours, we're trying new things. But what happens when people exit school and they enter in their work life? In my experience, the curve sags a lot. And people, they're doing new things, but not so often and not so much all the time. So this delta, this difference in this curve, for me, I think is actually a problem. And I'll tell you why. I have a bias about this. I think in any given moment, any of us, we're either growing a little bit or we're dying a little bit. And to the degree that we are sagging down here in this curve and we're not growing, we're dying a lot more than we should. So I got interested in this question, and I started to think about, well, what's going on, what leads to this? And if you think about the work life, people kind of leave school and everybody says, okay, let's join this next world. Well, our life is this big. Our work life is, to be sure, smaller than our life. Our life is a lot bigger. But our work life takes up about 30 to 60%, depending on what kind of job you have, of the hours of your waking life. Okay, so there's huge potential, there's massive potential in your work life to grow. There's a lot of new things you can be doing. And it looks like, in my view, there's a lot of learning we're leaving on the table. So, okay, this is not good. What's going on here? So I started to dig in this a little more, and I started to do research about, how is it that people are finding in their work lives, or what are they finding there, and what are they not finding? And what is it about having a job that really turns you on that might lead to more learning, or that, I think of the other way around, if you really want to learn about a job, it leads you more into that job. And how's that working for some people, and how's that not working for others? And one of the very first places I started was, well, how do people think about selecting a job? How do they think about what's next? How do they think about this question? And here's what I found. I found that far, far too many people settle. And here's kind of what it looks like. People will go out and they'll get their first job. And what it looks like is either get from listings. No, job listings aren't really where jobs come from. Jobs come from other people. All right, so my mother knows someone, or my older brother knows someone, and they say, hey, so-and-so's graduating, that might be you. This person's smart, you got to talk to them. You go and talk to them. It's generally something you're interested in. And it's a real offer. There's an option there. So you're like, you know what? I'm going to go try this out. I'm going to go work with these folks. You go into the job. You're smart. You get promoted. You move up in the company. You might take a similar kind of job at a different kind of company. Fast forward to age 30, and a ton of people look in the mirror and say, I guess this is what I do. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but let's contrast that with the folks who've zigzagged their way to a job that really turns them on, where they found something that really lights them up. I'm not saying it was their first job, but they found something through trial and error that really makes them want to learn and grow more. So I started looking at this, and I started to think, is the problem that people are, is the problem, is the takeaway here that, people should maybe wait, and, wait for the ideal job? No, not at all. That's actually a horrible strategy. Waiting, in fact, is not going to help you out at all. And in fact, the ideal job doesn't exist, right? Every job has goods and bads and trade-offs. I think the takeaway here from that little pattern of how people get jobs is the problem isn't that people take the jobs. The problem is that people aren't leaving their jobs enough. More people need to cleave off a cycle of what they're doing and start a new one. And what I want to talk about a little bit today is what I want for you all is I want you to find your way to a work life that's worth living, however you define it. but that's what I want for you. And here's what's on the line. We've got these institutions that are stuck. We've got a Congress that is stuck. We've got economies, the one we're in, and we're in several, that are stuck. Now, if we as individuals fall off on this curve and quit learning, or at least learn at a much lower rate, there's no way we're going to change those things. So a lot at stake. And it also turns out, and this is my opinion, I feel like when people are learning, that's when they're happier too. They've got more to give. They have this more abundant life versus this sort of scarce life. So this is what's on the line. So what I want to talk to you about is, what would it look like if you went into jobs and up front, you had an idea of why you were going to take that job, but you also, maybe even from the beginning, knew why you might leave it and when you might leave it. And another way of saying this is, I want you to think about your next job and sets of jobs as a prototype, or as prototyping. So let's talk about that for a second. Prototyping. What is a prototype? Okay. So a prototype, or prototyping, is it's a way to start when you don't have all the answers. And a prototype, one way to describe it is, a prototype is the simplest thing you can build where you actually can start to get some feedback that you need. Okay? So prototyping is used by software engineers all over the place. It's used by product designers. It's used by entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs that are building companies, and they have a general idea of where they want to go. But the problem they're working on is so complex, it's so new, there's so many variables that you cannot engineer it. There's no math that's going to let you calculate it in advance. The equations are hopeless. So you need to act, you need to do something where you don't have all the answers. And prototyping allows you to do that. Let me give you an example. Probably one of the best known examples of a prototype that's done well is the iPod. So let's talk about Apple and their iPod for a second. The iPod, when it started, they had an idea of what they wanted to do. They probably even had a foggy idea of where they wanted to go with it. But the idea was foggy at the time. I think this is probably about 10 years ago. And what they did is they set out and they built the first thing. And that first thing, they built it, they had an idea of what they wanted to test. There was a couple experiments they wanted to run, and they put it in the water. And they let people use it. And when people used it, they got feedback, and they learned stuff. And the learning, at the end of that cycle, of that iPod, they took that learning from one and used it as input into the next cycle. Okay? Apple did a great job of this. Over 8 years, they released 19 iPods. And the trajectory of this was, you know, hey, listen, we're going to start with one idea, but it's going to move along the way, and we're going to learn what we want from, in this case, product, in your case, your work life. We're going to learn more about what we want along the way as other people interact with us, as we get more feedback from the world. Now, the key thing about this is they had many cycles. The cycles were short, so they were willing to start an experiment and then end it, so they knew they could start another one. And second, the learning, all the good stuff, comes in between the cycles. So it's not just enough to end something, right? Anybody can walk away. But the idea of starting something, running your experiments, and knowing when your experiments are done so you can start the next thing, that's where iteration comes in. That's where prototyping comes in. So that's an example of, you know, sort of in the product world. So what's prototyping in your work life? The best way to think about prototyping in your work life is to relate to all the opportunities in front of you as essentially experiments you get to run. You're going to have some questions about, there's some things you might want to find out. There might be some things you want to go see for yourself. There might be some things that you're kind of attracted to, and it's probably not one thing, it's probably several things. There might be a couple kinds of impact or change you might want to see out there in the world. That's all well and good in planning, but what happens if you actually go do it? You get a whole bunch of feedback. You get a lot of good stuff. Okay? So the best way to think about prototyping in your work life then is to view, start with a couple questions, figure out what you might want to test or learn next, then identify a job or two that let you run those tests. So notice the goal is no longer get a job. The job's in some ways incidental. The goal is to run the experiments, to build the prototype. And you're just going to look, jobs are the data set, you're just going to look for a job or two that help you run those tests. And it doesn't have to be a full-time job. It can be a job and volunteer, a gig over there. There's lots of stuff that you can fill your life with. So the idea is prototype your way through, and over the cycles, over each iteration, you learn more about what you want, and you learn about more what you don't want. In many ways, what you learn is you learn more about who you want to become. And this is different from knowing today exactly what you want to be when you're 80 or 90. That question's not answerable. This is, I kind of have an idea right now. I think I know how to get started, but the way I'm going to get started is going to lead to more learning and more learning. So let me give you an example of a person I worked with. We'll call her Serena. She came out of college. She was interested generally in education. And when most people think education, they think teacher. In some of the other work I do, we know there's about 12,000 types of jobs in education. So there's a lot more than teacher. But that's where she went first. And she wanted to see for herself whether teaching would be the thing that lights her up, would be the thing that really was going to turn her on. So great, she started right away and she found a teaching job at a public school. She went into that. Here's what she found out. She learned that the connection with the kids was awesome. It was really fulfilling for her. She also learned that the culture and the institution she was in left her really cold. Now, for the average, for most folks, they might stay in that teaching job for 30 or 40 years. She actually had the gumption to say, okay, I've learned some stuff, and I want to go now and see if I can try out some other experiments, but I'm still really interested in education. I still want to see what's out there. So she wanted to go see if she could manage some people and maybe build some tools that also helped education. So she went to an education technology firm. She did really well there. Then she ran another experiment. And I want to go see if I can actually fundraise. I can raise some money. That would be helpful. She did really well there. Fast forward, I'll give you the end of the story. She's now working at a national nonprofit that works with high school students and helping them succeed. And she's working at a level and in a job she'd never imagined before, and at a scope she'd never imagined. And actually, by the way, with a whole bunch of skills she didn't think in advance that she would develop that she now has. And she loves it. It's definitely working for her. So she's zigzagged her way there. I know we got to move with the time here real quick. So here's how you get started. You need to ask different questions. The question usually people want you to ask is, well, what do you want to do with your life? Impossible to answer. So instead of that, give yourself a little space. Not what do you want to do, but what do you think you want to do? And actually, forever, I can't answer forever. It's what over the next 2 years, what do you think you want to do? And actually, I think this is even harder to answer. So these are the two questions I want to leave you with. Over the next 2 years, what do you want to be better known for? And over the next 2 years, what do you want to see for yourself? What do you want to directly observe? What experiments do you want to run? There's a lot of amazing people in this room to have that conversation with. And I hope you'll take these questions and write them for yourself, either tonight or at the end of the weekend. And set them out. This is the basis for your first prototype, okay? This is what you're going to head into your first cycle with. And when you've run those tests, start a new cycle, iterate. There's a lot of things that are stuck out there in the world. There's no reason why you need to be stuck. And if you can keep learning after college, if you get on a better curve than what the average is out there, you're going to remake the world. And I really look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you